The November rain fell in sheets across Manhattan, transforming the streets of Tribeca into rivers of reflected neon and amber light. Emma Reynolds stood at the employee entrance of Lucerno, her thin jacket already soaked through despite the short walk from the subway station. She paused before pushing open the heavy metal door, taking a moment to watch the city move around her. Taxis honking, well-dressed couples hurrying under shared umbrellas toward the restaurant's elegant front entrance, the distant wail of sirens painting the soundtrack of a Tuesday night in New York. 28 years old, and this was her life. 2 jobs, 3 if you counted the occasional weekend shifts at the bookstore in Park Slope. The nursing degree she'd abandoned 3 years ago sat like a ghost in her studio apartment in Brooklyn, the textbooks gathering dust on a shelf she couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring herself to donate. "Emma, you're late." Marco's voice cut through her thoughts as she stepped into the kitchen's organized chaos. The head chef rarely shouted, which somehow made his disapproval feel worse. "Table 12 has been asking for you specifically. Apparently, you're the only server who knows how to explain the difference between our Barolo and Brunello without making them feel stupid." Emma managed a tired smile as she hung her damp jacket in her locker and straightened her crisp white shirt. "I'm 3 minutes early, Marco. My shift doesn't start until 6. In this business, if you're not early, you're late." But his stern expression softened, the way it always did with her. Marco had been the one to hire her 3 years ago when she'd walked in desperate, her eyes still red from crying, her savings account nearly empty. He'd taken one look at her and said, "You're running from something. That's fine. Just don't let it affect your work." She hadn't. If anything, work had become her refuge, the one place where she could lose herself in the precise choreography of fine dining, where her purpose was clear and her value measurable in satisfied customers and decent tips. The dining room at Lucerno was a study in understated elegance. Exposed brick walls from the building's 19th century origins contrasted with modern steel accents and soft Edison lighting that made everyone look like they belonged in a glossier, better version of their life. The clientele ranged from Wall Street executives celebrating deals to tourists willing to splurge on an authentic Italian experience, from local celebrities who appreciated the restaurant's discretion to couples marking anniversaries and proposals. Emma had learned to read them all, the nervous young man fingering an engagement ring in his pocket, the business partners whose smiles didn't reach their eyes, the family trying to paper over tension with expensive wine. She'd become an expert in human behavior, in knowing when to be invisible and when to offer a warm word, when to recite the specials with enthusiasm, and when to simply point to the menu's highlights with quiet efficiency. "Table 12, huh?" Maya appeared at her elbow, her best friend and fellow server grinning with barely contained amusement. "Mr. Henderson and his very patient wife. He's been asking about wine pairings for 20 minutes. I told him you were the expert." "You're terrible," Emma said, but she was smiling as she approached the table. Mr. Henderson was a regular, a retired professor who treated every meal like an academic exercise. His wife, Eleanor, caught Emma's eye and gave a long-suffering but affectionate look. The first hour of her shift passed in the familiar rhythm. Recommendations offered, orders taken, plates delivered with perfect timing. Emma found comfort in the routine, in the fact that for these hours her world made sense. She knew the menu by heart, knew which tables the kitchen prioritized, knew how to read the subtle signals from the maître d' about which customers required extra attention. It was during a brief lull, as she was refilling water glasses at table 7, that she noticed the commotion at the entrance. Giovanni, the maître d', was speaking in rapid Italian to someone just out of view, his posture radiating attention Emma had never seen in the usually unflappable man. The restaurant's owner, Mr. Castellano, had emerged from his office, also unusual for a Tuesday evening, and was personally greeting whoever had arrived. "VIP?" Maya whispered, appearing beside Emma with a tray of dirty plates. "Must be. Giovanni looks like he's about to have a heart attack." The private dining room at the back of Lucerno was typically reserved weeks in advance for parties of 8 or more. Emma had served there countless times. Birthday celebrations, corporate dinners, the occasional discreet meeting that she knew better than to ask about. But she'd never seen it opened for a party of 4, and certainly not with less than an hour's notice. "Emma?" Giovanni appeared at her side, his usually perfect English slightly accented by stress. "I need you to take the private room tonight." "Me? But I thought Mr. Castellano specifically requested you. Said you're discreet, professional, no wine." He lowered his voice. "These are important guests." Everything must be perfect. Understand? She understood what he wasn't saying. These weren't just important guests. They were dangerous ones. In 3 years at Lucerno, she'd learned that certain customers came with an unspoken understanding. Don't ask questions. Don't gossip. Don't remember faces or conversations. The generous tips that followed such evenings helped pay her rent, and Emma had become very good at selective amnesia. Of course, she said, smoothing down her apron with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. I'll take care of them. The private dining room was dimly lit, candles casting dancing shadows across the walls. 4 men sat at the table, but Emma's attention was immediately drawn to the one at the head. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair showing distinguished threads of silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. His suit was impeccably tailored, the kind of garment that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. But it was his presence that filled the room, a quiet authority that made the space feel smaller, more charged. Vincent Moretti. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his type. Power sat on his shoulders like a well-worn coat. Good evening, gentlemen. Emma's voice was steady, professional, betraying none of her nervousness. My name is Emma, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink? The man to Vincent's right, younger and built like he spent serious hours in a gym, started to speak, but Vincent raised a hand slightly, the smallest gesture that commanded immediate silence. The wine list, please. His voice was deep, cultured with the faintest trace of a New York accent buried under years of careful refinement. Not threatening exactly, but absolutely certain of being obeyed. Emma handed him the leather-bound list and stepped back, giving him space while remaining attentive. She'd learned this dance well. As he studied the selections, she took in the other men at the table, the younger one who'd been silenced, probably muscle, despite the expensive suit. An older man with gray hair and sharp eyes who looked like he'd been calculating probabilities since birth. And a third man, unremarkable except for the way he never quite looked at anyone directly, his gaze always sliding away. The 2015 Barolo, Vincent said finally. The Giacomo Conterno, if you have it. Emma felt her eyebrows rise slightly before she could control her reaction. The Giacomo Conterno was one of the most expensive bottles on their list, nearly $1,500. But more than that, it was a choice that revealed knowledge. This wasn't a man showing off, this was someone who understood wine. Excellent choice, sir. That's one of our finest selections. I'll have it brought up from the cellar immediately. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. You know wine. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. I've learned what we serve here, yes. That's not what I meant. The faintest suggestion of a smile touched his lips. The way you reacted to my selection, that wasn't the reaction of someone who's memorized a list. You actually know why that vintage is special. Emma hesitated, caught between the desire to remain invisible and the unexpected pleasure of being seen. The 2015 vintage from Giacomo Conterno is considered one of the finest Barolos of the decade. The balance between the Nebbiolo's tannins and the fruit is nearly perfect. It's a wine that rewards patience but is drinking beautifully right now. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. Bring the bottle. As Emma descended to the wine cellar, her heart was pounding harder than the situation warranted. She'd served countless demanding customers, had navigated the egos of the wealthy and powerful with practiced ease. But something about Vincent Moretti unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. It wasn't fear, exactly, though she sensed that crossing him would be dangerous. It was more like recognition, as if some part of her that had been dormant for 3 years had suddenly woken up and was paying attention. The wine cellar was cool and quiet, rows of bottles resting in climate-controlled precision. Emma found the Giacomo Conterno and carefully removed it from its shelf, cradling it as she climbed back up the narrow stairs. She was halfway up when she paused, frowning. Something was wrong. The bottle's seal. It was intact, but there was something off about it. A slight discoloration around the capsule, barely visible in the cellar's dim light. Emma had handled thousands of wine bottles in her time at Lucerno, and she'd never seen that particular shade of oxidation. She held the bottle up to the light, examining it more closely. Her nursing training, dormant for 3 years but never truly forgotten, kicked in with sudden clarity. The discoloration wasn't oxidation. It was residue. Someone had tampered with the seal, had opened this bottle and resealed it with imperfect precision. Emma's mind raced. It could be nothing. A defect from the winery, a storage issue, her paranoia inventing problems where none existed. But the part of her that had once been trained to spot the subtle signs of medical danger, that had learned to trust her instincts about things that seemed wrong, was screaming a warning she couldn't ignore. She could bring the bottle up, serve it, say nothing. It was almost certainly fine. The alternative was to make a scene, to potentially embarrass herself over what might be a simple imperfection, to call into question Lucerno's quality control in front of important guests who Mr. Castellano had personally requested she impress. But if she was right, Emma made her decision. She climbed the rest of the stairs quickly, her mind already working through how to handle this. Direct confrontation would alarm the guests and might cause a panic if she was wrong. But serving a potentially compromised bottle was unthinkable. In the kitchen, she found Marco overseeing the preparation of what looked like an elaborate seafood course. "Marco, I need you to look at something." "Emma, I'm in the middle of—" "Please, it's important." Something in her tone made him pause. He wiped his hands on his apron and followed her to the side station where she'd set down the bottle. "What am I looking at?" "The seal. See that discoloration?" Marco examined it, his experienced eyes narrowing. Could be anything. A bad cork, temperature fluctuation during shipping, or someone opened it and resealed it. "Emma, that's a serious accusation. Why would anyone—" "I don't know, but I know what I'm seeing, and my instincts are telling me something is wrong." Marco studied her face, then sighed. "What do you want to do?" "I need to not serve this bottle, but I can't tell them why without causing a scene. So bring a different bottle. They ordered the 2015 Giacomo Conterno specifically. If I bring something else, they'll notice." Marco's expression shifted from annoyance to understanding. "You need to make it look like an accident. I need to make sure that bottle doesn't get opened." They looked at each other, an entire conversation happening in silence. Marco finally nodded. "Do what you need to do. I'll back you up." Emma picked up the bottle, her hands steady despite her racing heart, and returned to the private dining room. The four men were in quiet conversation that stopped the moment she entered. She approached the table with the wine, a corkscrew ready, and began the ritual of presenting the bottle to Vincent for his approval. "The 2015 Giacomo Conterno Barolo, as you requested, sir." He examined the label, nodded. "Excellent." Emma began to cut the foil, her movements practiced and precise. This was the moment. The bottle was positioned just so, her grip deliberately loose. She started to pull the cork and then, her hand slipped. The bottle tilted, and deep red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, spreading like blood across expensive linen. Emma gasped, letting the bottle drop slightly as if trying to catch it, making the spill worse. Wine dripped onto the floor, onto the edge of Vincent's immaculate suit jacket. "I'm so sorry." She set the bottle down quickly, grabbing napkins to try to contain the damage. "I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened. Please, let me—" "Stop." Vincent's voice cut through her flustered apologies. He was standing now, wine dripping from his sleeve. But his eyes weren't on the mess. They were on her, intense and analytical. "You did that on purpose." Emma's breath caught. The room had gone utterly silent. The other three men were staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to hostility. She could feel her career ending, could imagine Mr. Castellano's fury, could see her small apartment slipping away as she lost yet another job. But Vincent's eyes held hers, and in them she saw not anger but curiosity. "Why?" he asked simply. Emma had a choice. Lie, apologize, pretend it was an accident, and hope for mercy, or tell the truth and accept whatever consequences came. She chose truth. The seal on the bottle was tampered with. Her voice was steady now, professional. There was discoloration around the capsule that I've never seen before. It could be nothing. Probably is nothing. But I couldn't serve you something I wasn't completely certain about. The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours but was probably only seconds. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He turned to the younger man at his right. "Tony, get that bottle to the car. Have it tested now." Tony moved immediately, carefully picking up the bottle with a napkin and disappearing from the room. The older man with calculating eyes was watching Emma with new interest. The third man, the one who never made eye contact, had gone pale. Vincent's attention returned to Emma. "What's your name?" "Emma Reynolds, sir." "Emma Reynolds." He said it slowly, as if testing the syllables. "You have medical training." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I was in nursing school. I didn't finish. But you learned to spot contamination, to trust your instincts when something seems wrong, even if you can't immediately explain why." Yes, sir. He nodded slowly, then turned to the older man. Sal, take care of our guest. He gestured to the pale man who'd been sitting quietly. He seems uncomfortable. Maybe he needs some air. Emma watched as Sal stood, placed a hand on the pale man's shoulder in a gesture that looked friendly but clearly wasn't, and guided him from the room. The implications were clear even to her, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She'd been right. The bottle had been tampered with, and the man who'd arranged it had been sitting at this very table. Vincent was still watching her, his dark eyes unreadable. I need to make some phone calls. You'll stay here. I should get the manager, explain about the mess. The manager knows you're here on my request. He won't interrupt. Sit down, Emma Reynolds. It wasn't a suggestion. Emma slowly sat in the chair Sal had vacated, her mind reeling. Outside, she could hear the restaurant's normal sounds. Conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses. In here, the world had shifted into something unfamiliar and dangerous. Vincent made 3 phone calls, each brief and in Italian that Emma couldn't follow. When he finished, he sat back down, regarding her with that same intense attention. You saved my life tonight, he said finally. Do you understand that? I couldn't be sure, but you were sure enough to risk your job, to potentially make a fool of yourself in front of customers your boss specifically asked you to impress. Why? Emma thought about lying, about giving some noble answer, but something about those eyes demanded honesty. I've lost people because I hesitated, because I second-guessed my instincts. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Something flickered across his face. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. Who did you lose? That's personal. Everything's personal, Emma. The question is whether you're willing to share it. She shouldn't tell him. He was a stranger, clearly dangerous. Someone she should want nothing to do with. But the words came anyway. My fiancé. 3 years ago. I saw signs something was wrong that night, but I told myself I was being paranoid. By the time I trusted my instincts, it was too late. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. She hesitated, then asked, the man who left with Sal, he was the one who tampered with the wine? That will be determined. But yes, I believe so. Why would he want to hurt you? An excellent question. One I intend to answer very thoroughly. He leaned back in his chair, still studying her. Tony will return soon with the test results. I expect they'll confirm your suspicions, which means I owe you a debt. You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do. No, you did what someone with training, instincts, and courage would do. That's not anyone. He pulled out a wallet, extracted several bills. This is for the trouble tonight, and for your discretion about what happened here. Emma glanced at the money he'd set on the table. $5,000, her rent for 3 months. The difference between staying afloat and drowning. I can't accept that. You can and you will. Consider it hazard pay. When she still hesitated, he added, Emma, I'm not a man who likes to owe debts. Take the money, or I'll find other ways to repay you, and I suspect you'd find those less comfortable. She took the money, folding it carefully and putting it in her apron pocket. Her hands were shaking slightly now as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the realization of what had just happened, what she'd potentially gotten herself involved in. Tony returned, whispered something to Vincent in Italian. Vincent's expression hardened, then he nodded and Tony left again. You were right, Vincent said to Emma. The wine was poisoned. Arsenic-based compound, slow-acting but lethal. I would have been dead within hours, and it would have looked like a heart attack or stroke. Very professional. He paused. Very expensive. Emma felt sick. She'd been right, but the confirmation brought no satisfaction. What will happen to the man who did it? That's not something you need to worry about. But, Emma, his voice was gentle but firm. There are things in my world you don't want to know about. Lines you don't want to cross. Tonight you did a brave and decent thing. Don't let curiosity pull you into places you'll regret. She understood what he was telling her. Go back to your normal life. Forget this happened. Take the money and walk away. But as she looked at him, at this man whose life she'd saved, she realized with sudden clarity that walking away wasn't going to be that simple. Not because he wouldn't let her, but because she'd already crossed a line she hadn't known existed. She'd stopped being invisible. She'd taken action. She'd trusted her instincts in a way she hadn't since David died. And something in her, something that had been frozen for 3 years, had started to thaw. Vincent stood, buttoning his jacket despite the wine stains. You should return to work. I imagine your manager will want an explanation for the mess. Emma stood as well, grateful for the dismissal but also strangely reluctant to leave. What should I tell him? The truth, that I'm a clumsy customer who knocked over his own wine. I'll speak with him personally, make sure there are no consequences for you. You don't have to. I know, I want to. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, simple black with just a name and phone number. If you ever need anything, or if you remember any other details about tonight that seem important. Emma took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact was electric, unexpected, and she pulled back quickly. I don't think there's anything else. You'd be surprised what memory brings back once the shock fades. He gestured toward the door. Go, before your boss decides to check on why I'm taking so long. She walked to the door, then paused and turned back. Mr. Moretti. Vincent. That man who left with Sal. What if he was just a pawn? What if whoever wanted you dead is still out there? They are. Tonight was a message that someone wants me gone. But now I know to be watching. He smiled, and it was a hard expression, nothing warm about it. And I'm very good at watching. Emma nodded and left the private dining room, her mind spinning. The main dining area seemed surreally normal. Couples sharing desserts, business people lingering over espresso, the gentle clink of silverware on porcelain. Maya caught her eye from across the room, her expression full of questions Emma couldn't begin to answer. Mr. Castellano intercepted her before she reached the kitchen. Emma, Mr. Moretti spoke to me. He says the spill was his fault entirely and that you handled it with grace and professionalism. I should have been more careful. He left a very generous compensation for the damaged tablecloth and requested that you receive a commendation. He was quite impressed with you. Mr. Castellano's eyes were sharp, assessing. He's not an easy man to impress. I just did my job. Yes. Well, see that you continue to do it with such discretion. The weight he put on that last word made his meaning clear. Whatever had happened in that private room stayed in that private room. The rest of Emma's shift passed in a blur. She moved through her tables mechanically, her mind replaying every moment of her encounter with Vincent Moretti, the way he'd immediately known she'd spilled the wine deliberately, the calm with which he'd handled the revelation of betrayal, the casual authority with which he'd directed his men to handle the situation, and the $5,000 now hidden in her locker. By the time her shift ended at midnight, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the streetlights. Emma changed out of her work clothes, stuffed the money deep in her bag, and headed for the subway. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and wanted nothing more than to get home, lock her door, and process everything that had happened. She didn't notice the black SUV that pulled away from the curb as she descended into the subway station. She didn't see the man in the dark coat, who watched her from across the street, speaking quietly into his phone. She didn't realize that while she'd been saving Vincent Moretti's life, she'd painted a target on her own back. Emma Reynolds rode the subway home to Brooklyn, stood in the shower until the hot water ran cold, and fell into bed as the city outside her window continued its endless rhythm. She kept Vincent's business card on her nightstand, next to the framed photo of David that she still couldn't bear to put away. She told herself tomorrow she'd throw the card away, deposit the money, and forget this night had ever happened. She told herself a lot of things that night. She believed none of them. Across town, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Vincent Moretti stood at his window with a glass of scotch watching the city lights. Tony entered quietly, knowing better than to disturb his boss when he was in this particular mood, but also knowing that waiting for permission to speak was sometimes more dangerous than interrupting. Sir, about the girl, Emma Reynolds. What about her? We ran a background check like you asked. She's clean. No criminal record. No connections to any families, no red flags. She's exactly what she appears to be, a struggling waitress with student debt and a tragic past. Vincent took a slow sip of his scotch. And the ex-fiancé? David Chen, 26 when he died, mugged in Park Slope 3 years ago, killed for a wallet that had $60 in it. Tony paused. Except the mugging was never solved, and David Chen worked as an accountant at Morrison & Associates before he died. We have some associates who've had dealings with Morrison & Associates. They handle money for some complicated clients. Vincent turned from the window, his expression sharpening. Complicated how? The kind of complicated that sometimes requires people to disappear. You think the mugging wasn't random. I think it's an interesting coincidence that a man who had access to financial records for some very private individuals happened to die right around the time some of those individuals were being investigated by the federal authorities. Vincent set down his glass very carefully. And his fiancée? Emma Reynolds, who was conveniently at nursing school when it happened, who had no connection to his work, who by all accounts was devastated by his death and never looked into it any further than the police investigation. Which went nowhere. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, puzzle pieces rearranging themselves in his mind. So tonight, Emma Reynolds uses instincts she developed in nursing school to spot a poisoned bottle of wine. Wine that was meant for me. Yes, sir. Except what if it wasn't meant for me? Tony's expression shifted as he understood. What if it was meant for whoever handled that specific bottle? A bottle I ordered. In a restaurant where she works. In a private room she was specifically assigned to serve. Vincent turned back to the window. Someone wanted Emma Reynolds dead tonight, Tony. And they very nearly succeeded. But why? If she doesn't know anything, if she's been out of it for 3 years, maybe she knows something she doesn't know she knows. Or maybe someone thinks she does. Or maybe... Vincent stopped, a cold realization settling over him. Maybe David Chen left something behind. Something he thought would be safe with her because she'd never think to look for it. You want me to bring her in? Put protection on her? No, not yet. If we're right, whoever tried tonight will try again. But they'll be more careful now, more direct. Put someone on her. Quietly. I want to know where she goes, who she talks to, any change in her routine. And if they make another move, then we stop them, and we find out who they're working for. Vincent's reflection in the window was hard, determined. Emma Reynolds saved my life tonight. It's only fair I return the favor. Tony nodded and left. Vincent remained at the window, thinking about the young woman with sad eyes and quick instincts who'd crashed into his carefully controlled world. She reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. Someone from a long time ago, before he'd become the man he was now. Before he'd learned that mercy was a weakness and trust was a commodity to be traded carefully. But Emma Reynolds had shown him mercy tonight without knowing who he was, or what he could do for her. She'd risked everything to protect a stranger because it was the right thing to do. In Vincent Moretti's world, people like that didn't usually survive very long. He intended to make sure she was the exception. Across the city, in her small Brooklyn apartment, Emma Reynolds finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Unaware that her life had just become infinitely more complicated, unaware that the man she'd saved was now watching her, unaware that the shadows she'd sensed 3 years ago when David died were circling back, patient and hungry, unaware that tomorrow, when she woke up, the ordinary life she'd built from the wreckage of her grief would begin to crumble. But for now, she slept, and dreamed of wine spilling like blood across white linen, and dark eyes that saw too much. Emma woke to watery November sunlight filtering through her apartment's single window, the kind of pale morning light that made Brooklyn look simultaneously hopeful and exhausted. For a moment, in that space between sleep and full consciousness, she forgot about the previous night. Then memory crashed back like a wave. The wine bottle, Vincent Moretti's dark eyes, the $5,000 currently hidden in her sock drawer. She sat up slowly, her body aching with the kind of tension that came from a night of restless sleep. The digital clock on her nightstand read 7:43 a.m. She had to be at the bookstore by 10 for her weekend shift, which gave her just enough time for coffee and the long subway ride to Park Slope. Emma's apartment was a studio in Sunset Park, one of those places that real estate listings generously called cozy and everyone else called barely livable. 400 square feet of space that contained her entire life, a Murphy bed that folded into the wall, a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge, a bathroom so small she had to stand sideways to close the door. But it was hers, paid for with her own money, and the window faced east so she got morning light. In New York, that counted as luxury. She made coffee with her French press, the one extravagance she allowed herself, and stood by the window looking down at the street. Her neighborhood was already awake. Mr. Kim opening his bodega on the corner, the early morning commuters hurrying toward the subway, a group of teenagers in school uniforms laughing as they walked past. Normal life, continuing its ordinary rhythm. Except Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She kept replaying the moment Vincent had looked at her and said, "You saved my life tonight." The weight in those words, the implication of a debt she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to carry. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Girl, you have to tell me what happened in that private room last night. Mr. C looked like he'd seen a ghost when Mr. Tall, Dark, and Dangerous left. "Call me." Emma smiled despite herself. Maya had been her closest friend for 2 years, ever since they'd bonded over a particularly difficult customer who'd sent back the same dish 4 times. Maya was everything Emma wasn't. Outgoing, confident, the kind of person who walked into a room and made it brighter. She'd been trying to get Emma to date again for months, convinced that the right guy would help her move past David's death. Emma typed back, "Nothing exciting, just a spilled wine bottle and an understanding customer. Talk later." It was a lie, but what was she supposed to say? "I accidentally saved a Mafia boss from poisoning and now I have enough cash to pay 3 months' rent?" That conversation was better had in person, if she decided to have it at all. She showered quickly in the tiny bathroom, trying not to think about how the water pressure was getting worse, how the landlord kept promising to fix it but never did. Got dressed in jeans and a sweater, practical clothes for a day of shelving books and helping customers. Grabbed her bag, checked that the money was still hidden in her sock drawer, it was, and headed out. The walk to the subway took her past familiar landmarks. The corner store where she bought coffee when she was running late. The laundromat where she spent every Sunday afternoon. The playground where neighborhood kids played basketball even in the cold. Her life had become small in the 3 years since David died, bounded by work and home and the careful routine that kept her functioning. She was halfway down the subway stairs when she first noticed it, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the instinctive awareness of being watched. Emma paused, pretending to check her phone while she scanned the street behind her. Nothing obvious, just the usual morning crowd, but the feeling didn't go away. On the subway, she found herself studying the other passengers more carefully than usual. The businessman absorbed in his phone, the young mother with a stroller, the college student with headphones, nodding along to music Emma couldn't hear. All perfectly normal, all perfectly ordinary, except for the man in the corner seat wearing a black jacket and a Yankees cap, who seemed very carefully not to be looking at her. Emma told herself she was being paranoid. The events of last night had spooked her, made her see threats where none existed, but she'd learned 3 years ago that paranoia sometimes kept you alive. She got off at her stop in Park Slope, emerged into the crisp morning air, and walked the 3 blocks to Cornerstone Books. The independent bookstore had been her refuge when she'd first moved to the neighborhood after David died, a place that smelled like coffee and paper and represented everything safe and predictable about her new life. "Emma, thank God you're here." Rachel, the owner, looked harried as she unlocked the front door. "I've got a shipment of 200 books that came in yesterday and they're all just sitting in boxes. Any chance you can help me sort them before we open?" "Of course." Emma dropped her bag behind the counter and followed Rachel to the back room, grateful for the distraction. Physical work she could handle. Alphabetizing, organizing, creating order from chaos. These were tasks with clear solutions and measurable results. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that comes from familiarity. Rachel had given Emma this job when she desperately needed something to fill her weekends, had never asked intrusive questions about why a former nursing student was working retail, had simply offered kindness and steady hours. "You seem distracted," Rachel said finally, setting down a stack of mysteries. "Everything okay?" Emma considered lying, then settled for a partial truth. "Weird night at the restaurant. VIP customer, lots of pressure, just still processing. The glamorous life of fine dining." Rachel smiled sympathetically. "I don't know how you do it, dealing with demanding rich people all the time. Most of them are fine. It's just..." Emma trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Just what? Just that one of them might have been targeted for murder and she'd accidentally gotten involved. That she now had $5,000 in cash hidden in her apartment and no idea what it meant. The door chimed as their first customer of the day entered. Emma welcomed the interruption, the return to routine. She spent the next few hours helping customers find books, processing sales, recommending titles. The familiar rhythm soothed her nerves, pushed last night back into the category of strange but over events. But the feeling of being watched persisted. She noticed him during her lunch break. The same man from the subway, or someone who looked very much like him, sitting in the coffee shop across the street. He was reading a newspaper, but in an era when everyone read news on their phones, the physical paper felt like a prop, a way to have something to hide behind. Emma's hands tightened around her sandwich. This was crazy. She was imagining things, letting last night's drama infect her perception of ordinary life. That man wasn't watching her. He was just a guy reading a paper, drinking coffee, existing in the same neighborhood she did. But when she left work at 6 after a full shift of shelving and sales, she spotted a black SUV parked down the street. Not the same one she'd seen outside Lucerno. Or was it? In New York, black SUVs were as common as yellow taxis. She was definitely being paranoid. The SUV followed her to the subway station. Emma's heart was pounding as she descended the subway stairs, her nursing training kicking in with clinical detachment, elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, adrenaline response. She was scared, but she was also angry. Angry at whoever was following her. Angry at Vincent Moretti for pulling her into whatever this was. Angry at herself for not just throwing away his business card and pretending last night had never happened. She boarded the train, chose a seat near the door, kept her bag close. The car was moderately crowded with evening commuters, enough people that she felt relatively safe, but not so many that she couldn't watch for threats. She didn't see the man from the coffee shop, didn't see anyone obviously suspicious, but when she got off at her stop in Sunset Park, her hands were still shaking. The walk to her apartment felt longer than usual. Every shadow seemed to hold potential danger, every stranger a possible threat. Emma found herself cataloging exit routes, noting which stores were still open, remembering David's murder and how it had happened on a street not unlike this one, how quickly ordinary life could turn violent. She was fumbling with her keys at her building's entrance when a voice behind her said, "Miss Reynolds." Emma spun around, her back against the door, her keys positioned between her fingers the way the self-defense instructor had taught her at the community center. A man stood 3 feet away, hands visible and empty, expression neutral. Not the man from the coffee shop. Someone older, maybe 50, with gray hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Who are you?" Her voice was steadier than she expected. "My name is Sal Martinelli. We met briefly last night, though you were understandably focused on other things." He made no move to come closer. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. It's important." "How did you know where I live?" "Mr. Moretti knows a lot of things. He'd like the opportunity to explain some of them to you, if you're willing to listen." Emma's mind raced through her options. She could refuse, go inside, lock her door, and pretend this wasn't happening. She could call the police, though what would she tell them? A man politely asked her to talk to someone. She could run, though she suspected that would be futile. Or she could accept that ignoring this situation wasn't going to make it disappear. "Where?" she asked. "There's a restaurant 2 blocks from here. Public place, lots of witnesses. Mr. Moretti is waiting at a back table. He gives his word that no harm will come to you, and his word is something he takes very seriously." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "I want to keep my phone, and I want to be able to leave whenever I want." "Of course. He's not trying to frighten you, Miss Reynolds. He's trying to protect you." The restaurant was a small Italian place that Emma had walked past dozens of times but never entered. The kind of neighborhood spot that had been there for 30 years, where regulars knew the owner by name, and the menu never changed. Sal held the door for her and she saw Vincent immediately, sitting in a back booth, his expensive suit somehow not out of place among the red checkered tablecloths and wine bottles used as candle holders. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed natural on him. "Emma, thank you for coming. Please sit." She slid into the booth across from him, hyper-aware of Sal taking a position at a nearby table where he could watch the door. The restaurant was half full with early dinner customers, families, and couples who seemed completely oblivious to whatever was happening in this back corner. "You had me followed," Emma said without preamble. "All day. Why?" "To keep you safe." "From what?" Vincent signaled the waiter, ordered coffee for both of them without asking if she wanted any. It should have annoyed her, that presumption, but she was too tired and scared to care. When the waiter left, Vincent leaned back and studied her with those dark, assessing eyes. "Tell me what you noticed today. Any detail that seemed wrong. Anyone who appeared more than once." Emma wanted to refuse, to demand answers first, but something about his tone made her comply. She described the man on the subway, the same man at the coffee shop, the black SUV. Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. "His name is Marcus. He works for me. He's been keeping you safe." "Safe from what?" Emma repeated, her frustration building. "You keep saying that, but you haven't explained what I need protection from." The coffee arrived. Vincent waited until the waiter left, then leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "After you left last night, we tested the wine. As I told you, it was poisoned. But we also investigated how it got into the restaurant's wine cellar, Who had access? When it was placed there? And? The bottle was put there 2 days ago during a routine delivery. Someone paid off one of the delivery workers to swap it with a legitimate bottle. But here's what's interesting. It wasn't placed in the general cellar. It was placed in a specific section on a specific shelf. Emma felt cold. The expensive wines. The ones that are only served for special requests. Exactly. Someone knew that section of the cellar is only accessed when a customer specifically orders a premium vintage. They knew the staff doesn't regularly check those bottles. And they knew. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. They knew which server would be sent to retrieve it. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. Emma shook her head. That doesn't make sense. How could anyone know I'd be the one to get that bottle? I was only assigned to your table because Giovanni asked me to serve the private room, which he did at Mr. Castellano's specific request. A request that came from me because I'd heard you were excellent with wine and I wanted knowledgeable service for an important dinner. But you didn't know me. We'd never met before last night. No, but someone knew that if a rare vintage was ordered and if I was the one ordering it, you would be the server sent to the cellar. Vincent's voice was gentle now, as if he understood he was about to shatter her world. Emma, the poison wasn't meant for me. It was meant for you. The coffee shop seemed to recede, sounds becoming distant and muffled. Emma gripped the edge of the table, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. Why? I'm nobody. I don't have enemies. I don't know anything that would make someone want to. Don't you? The question hung between them. Emma thought about David, about his death 3 years ago that had never made sense. A random mugging for $60. A case that went cold within weeks. The police had told her it happened sometimes in New York. Senseless violence that defied explanation. But what if it hadn't been senseless? Tell me about David Chen, Vincent said quietly. How do you know about David? Because after last night, I needed to know everything about you. And when my people looked into your background, certain things didn't add up. Your fiancé worked as an accountant for Morrison and Associates. Are you familiar with that firm? Emma shook her head, feeling like she was watching this conversation from outside her body. They handle financial matters for clients who value discretion. Some of those clients have complicated business interests, the kind that sometimes require creative accounting. Vincent's tone was carefully neutral. 3 years ago, Morrison and Associates was being investigated by federal authorities for money laundering. The investigation quietly ended when their primary accountant died. David, Emma's voice was barely a whisper. David Chen was killed 6 months into that investigation. His death was ruled a random mugging, but the case was never solved. The investigation into Morrison and Associates stalled without his testimony and knowledge of their systems. Very convenient for some very powerful people. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. He never told me about any investigation. He never said he was in danger. He was probably trying to protect you, keep you separate from whatever he'd gotten involved in. Vincent paused, then said gently, Emma, did David ever give you anything for safekeeping? A drive, documents, passwords, anything he asked you to hold on to? She started to say no, then stopped. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Their last anniversary, 2 months before he died. David had given her a book of poetry, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, her favorite. He'd smiled and said, for the woman who saved me. She'd thought he was being romantic, talking about how she'd helped him through a difficult time. What if he'd meant something else entirely? There was a book, she said slowly. Poetry. He gave it to me as a gift. After he died, I couldn't bear to look at it. I put it in a storage unit with his other things. Vincent's expression sharpened with interest but also concern. Have you opened that book since he gave it to you? No, I couldn't. It hurt too much. Emma. Vincent reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. If David was being investigated, if he knew he was in danger, he might have hidden evidence somewhere he thought it would be safe, somewhere the people threatening him wouldn't think to look. With me, Emma whispered. He hid it with me, and I never knew. Which means for 3 years whoever wanted that evidence destroyed has been watching you, waiting to see if you'd lead them to it. They probably assumed you'd eventually go through his things, open the book, discover whatever he'd hidden there, but you never did. So they decided to eliminate the possibility. Emma felt sick. The poisoning wasn't about what I know. It was about what I might find. Yes, and now that they've failed once, they'll try again. More directly this time. Emma's mind was reeling. 3 years of grief and acceptance suddenly upended by the possibility that David's death hadn't been random, that she'd been living under surveillance, that her entire quiet life had been built on a foundation of lies and danger she'd never suspected. "I need to go home," she said abruptly. "I need to think about this. Emma, going home right now isn't safe. I don't care. This is too much. I need space to process, and I need you to stop having people follow me." She stood, grabbing her bag. "Thank you for the information. I'll figure out what to do with it." Vincent stood as well, his expression conflicted. "At least let Sal escort you to your building, please." She wanted to refuse on principle, but the thought of walking home alone with this new knowledge, with the awareness that someone wanted her dead, was too frightening. "Fine, but he stays outside." The walk back to her apartment was silent. Sal maintained a respectful distance, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give her space. Emma's thoughts spiraled in endless circles. David had known he was in danger. David had hidden evidence. David had died trying to protect information that Emma didn't even know existed. And she'd spent 3 years blaming herself for not saving him, when all along she'd been the one who needed saving. Her building looked exactly as it had when she'd left that morning, but everything felt different now. The familiar door, the worn stairs, the hallway that always smelled slightly of cooking oil. All of it felt contaminated by knowledge she couldn't unknow. Emma unlocked her apartment door, stepped inside, and immediately knew something was wrong. The air felt different, displaced, as if someone had recently moved through it. Her eyes went to the Murphy bed, still folded into the wall exactly as she'd left it. The kitchenette looked untouched, but her bookshelf? The books were slightly out of alignment, not obviously disturbed, but Emma was meticulous about her belongings in the way people who don't have much learn to be. Someone had been here. Someone had been searching through her things. With trembling hands, she went to the sock drawer where she'd hidden the $5,000. Empty. Emma's breath came in short gasps. She checked the bathroom. Cabinet doors open, toiletries moved, the tiny closet, her clothes pushed aside, the floor disturbed. Her entire apartment, her safe space, had been violated while she'd been at work. She grabbed her phone, started to call the police, then stopped. What would she tell them? Someone broke in but didn't take my TV or laptop, just some cash that legally I shouldn't have had anyway. And also I think they might be looking for evidence related to a 3-year-old murder that the police already closed. She called Vincent instead. He answered on the first ring. "Emma, someone was in my apartment." Her voice was shaking. "They searched everything. They took the money you gave me. Get out, right now. Don't pack anything, don't hesitate. Sal is outside. Go to him immediately. I can't just leave my home. Emma." His voice was firm but not unkind. "They know where you live. They know your routine. They've proven they can access your home while you're gone. You're not safe there. Please, come to me." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this herself, wanted to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to build over the past 3 years. But standing in her violated apartment, knowing someone had been touching her things, searching for something David had hidden, Emma realized she was in over her head. "Where?" she asked quietly. "Sal will bring you. Pack 1 bag. Essentials only. 5 minutes." Emma grabbed her duffel bag and moved through the apartment on autopilot. Clothes, toiletries, her laptop, the photo of David she kept on her nightstand, the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother before she died. Her entire life condensed into a single bag. As she was zipping it closed, her eyes fell on the small shelf where she kept her nursing textbooks, the ones she'd never been able to throw away. They represented everything she'd lost. Her dreams, her future, her belief that she could save people. She'd failed to save David, but maybe, somehow, she could still save herself. Sal was waiting outside her building, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes alert, scanning the street for threats. He took her bag without comment, led her to the black SUV she'd noticed earlier. Emma slid into the back seat, feeling like she was crossing a threshold she could never uncross. The drive through Brooklyn and into Manhattan passed in a blur. She watched the neighborhoods change through the tinted windows, the familiar streets of her life giving way to the gleaming towers of wealth and power. They crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the city lights reflecting off the East River, and Emma felt the weight of everything that had happened in the past 24 hours pressing down on her chest. The SUV pulled up to a building in the Upper West Side, the kind of address that appeared in luxury real estate listings with price tags that never included actual numbers. Sal escorted her through a lobby that was all marble and soft lighting, into an elevator that required a key card to access the penthouse level. "Mr. Moretti is waiting for you," Sal said as the doors opened. "You'll be safe here." The penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, modern furniture that managed to be both expensive and comfortable, artwork that Emma suspected was original rather than prints. But what struck her most was the quietness, the sense of being completely removed from the city below despite being surrounded by it. Vincent was standing by the windows, looking out at the park, a glass of something amber in his hand. He turned when he heard her enter, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should have insisted on protection immediately. I underestimated how quickly they'd move. It's not your fault." Emma set down her bag, suddenly exhausted. "I don't even know who they are." "That's what we're going to find out." Vincent gestured to the couch. "Sit. I'll get you something to drink. Then we need to talk about what happens next." Emma sat sinking into leather that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Vincent returned with a glass of water and what looked like bourbon, set them both on the coffee table in front of her. "This apartment is secure," he said, taking a seat across from her. "My people sweep it regularly for surveillance. The building has excellent security. You're safe here. For how long? I can't just hide in your penthouse forever." "No, but you can stay here while we figure out who's trying to kill you and why, and while we retrieve that book from your storage unit." Emma took a long drink of water, then picked up the bourbon and downed half of it in one go. It burned going down, but the warmth helped steady her. "This is insane. 48 hours ago I was a waitress with a normal, boring life. Now I'm hiding from people who want me dead because of something my fiancé hid 3 years ago that I didn't even know existed. I know it's overwhelming." "Overwhelming?" Emma heard her voice rising but couldn't control it. "I lost David. I spent 3 years rebuilding my life from nothing. I gave up nursing, gave up my dreams, gave up everything I wanted to be because I couldn't handle the grief. And now you're telling me he was murdered? That he knew he was in danger and he hid something with me that got him killed? That I've been living under surveillance for 3 years, while I blamed myself for not saving him?" The tears came then, hot and angry, and she couldn't stop them. Vincent moved to sit beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "You have every right to be angry," he said quietly. "At David for keeping you in the dark, at whoever killed him, at me for dragging you into my world, at all of it. I don't know how to be angry at David. He's dead. He's been dead for 3 years, and I've been having conversations with his ghost, asking him why he left me, and all this time there was an answer I didn't know about. He was trying to protect you. By lying? By hiding things? By leaving me alone to figure out a life I never wanted?" Emma wiped her eyes roughly. "I loved him. I would have stood by him no matter what. But he never gave me that choice." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "In my experience, people do terrible things in the name of protection. They convince themselves that lies are kindness, that ignorance is safety. Usually they're wrong. But their intentions," he trailed off, "their intentions are often good, even when their methods aren't." Emma looked at him, really looked at him. In the soft light of the apartment, he seemed less intimidating than he had at the restaurant, more human. There were lines around his eyes that suggested he didn't sleep as much as he should, a scar on his left hand that he probably had a story for, the careful way he held himself, like someone who'd learned never to fully relax. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do. I told you, you saved my life, and you warned me that you don't like to carry debts. So consider it repaid. You've warned me, given me a safe place to stay for the night. We're even." Vincent's expression was unreadable. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because," he stopped, seemed to consider his words carefully. "Because in my world, the people who do good things usually get punished for it. The people who have the courage to trust their instincts, to take action when it would be easier to look away, they're rare, and they deserve to be protected." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not. The real answer is that I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. Power, money, protection, revenge. You're the first person in a very long time who looked at me and just saw someone who needed help. That's worth something. It's worth a lot." They sat in silence for a while, the city glittering below them. Two people from completely different worlds trying to navigate a situation neither had expected. Emma finished her bourbon, felt the warmth spreading through her chest, pushing back some of the fear. "So what happens now?" she asked finally. "Now you rest. Tomorrow, We go to your storage unit and get that book. We find out what David hid, what's worth killing for, and then we figure out how to use it to end this. Just like that. Just like that. Vincent stood, offered her his hand. Come on. I'll show you to the guest room. You look like you're about to fall over. Emma let him pull her to her feet. The guest room was down a hallway lined with bookshelves, and she caught glimpses of titles that surprised her. Philosophy, poetry, history. Not what she'd expected from a man like Vincent Moretti. The room itself was beautiful in its simplicity. A large bed with white linens, a window overlooking the park, an ensuite bathroom that was probably bigger than her entire apartment. Vincent set her bag on the bed, then paused at the door. Emma, what you said about giving up nursing, about giving up your dreams, it's not too late to get them back. When this is over, when you're safe, you could go back to school, finish your degree. She shook her head. I can't. I'm not that person anymore. Why not? Because that person believed she could save people, and then she couldn't save the one person who mattered most. That kind of failure, it changes you. Vincent's expression was hard to read. Failure is only final if you let it be. David's death wasn't your fault, Emma. You didn't fail him. The people who killed him did. How can you possibly know that? Because I know what real failure looks like. I know what it means to have someone's blood on your hands. He met her eyes, and in them she saw something dark and old and painful. You lost someone you loved through no fault of your own. That's tragedy. But it's not failure. He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Emma stood alone in the expensive room in the home of a dangerous man, her entire life reduced to a duffel bag and questions she didn't know how to answer. She showered in the beautiful bathroom, borrowed the clothes Vincent had arranged for her, soft sweats that were clearly new, still had tags, got into the impossibly comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that seemed unlikely to come. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Em, where are you? You never called back. Getting worried. Emma typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on. Something came up. I'm safe. We'll explain soon. Promise. Maya's response was immediate. You're scaring me. Call me tomorrow? I will. More messages came in. Her manager at Lucerno asking about her schedule. Rachel from the bookstore wondering if she could pick up an extra shift. Her landlord with a passive-aggressive reminder about rent being due next week. The ordinary concerns of her ordinary life. Now feeling impossibly distant, Emma turned off her phone and rolled over, pulling the expensive sheets up to her chin. Through the window, she could see the lights of the city, could hear the distant sounds of traffic and sirens and life continuing without her. Somewhere out there, someone wanted her dead. Somewhere out there, David's killers were still free. And somewhere in a storage unit in Queens, a book of poetry held the answers to questions Emma hadn't known she should be asking. She finally fell asleep as dawn was breaking, exhausted and scared and strangely determined. Whatever came next, whatever David had hidden, whatever dangers waited, she would face them. Not because she was brave, but because she was tired of running, tired of grief, tired of letting fear make her choices for her. Tomorrow, she would find the truth. Tomorrow everything would change again. But for now, she slept in Vincent Moretti's guest room, protected by a man whose world was built on violence but who had shown her unexpected kindness, and dreamed of wine bottles and poetry books, and the ghost of a man who'd loved her enough to die keeping secrets. Across the hall, Vincent stood at his own window, watching the sun rise over Central Park. He hadn't slept, too busy running through scenarios and possibilities, making calls to contacts who might provide information, trying to piece together a puzzle that had been 3 years in the making. Emma Reynolds was a complication he hadn't anticipated. She made him feel things he'd learned long ago were weaknesses in his world. Protectiveness, guilt, the desire to fix something broken. He'd built his life on the principle that emotions were liabilities. That distance kept you alive. But watching her earlier, seeing her grief and anger and determination, he'd been reminded of someone, himself maybe, a long time ago, before he'd learned that the world was cruel, and the only way to survive was to be crueler. His phone rang. Tony, with the preliminary report on Morrison and Associates and their connection to David Chen. Boss, you're going to want to hear this. Vincent listened, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Tony finished, Vincent was quiet for a long moment. So it's bigger than we thought. A lot bigger. And the people involved, they're not going to let this go. If Emma finds what David hid, if it gets out, I know what it means. Vincent cut him off, which is why we need to find it first. You sure you want to get in the middle of this? It's not our fight. It is now. Vincent's voice was firm. Emma saved my life. That makes her my responsibility. And if taking down the people who killed David Chen happens to benefit my interests as well, he smiled, cold and calculating, then that's just good business. He ended the call and returned to watching the sunrise, thinking about the young woman sleeping in his guest room, about the dangerous game they were about to play, about how strange it was that a random act of kindness in a restaurant could change the trajectory of so many lives. Vincent Moretti had built an empire on knowing when to act and when to wait, when to show mercy and when to be ruthless. Tomorrow, he would need all of that experience and more. Because Emma Reynolds had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple revenge killing. She'd stumbled into a war, and whether she knew it or not, she'd just chosen her side. The storage facility in Queens looked abandoned in the gray morning light. Emma stood beside Vincent's SUV, staring at the building that held the last pieces of her life with David. She hadn't been here in 3 years. We can wait if you need more time, Vincent said quietly. Emma shook her head. No, let's get this over with. The unit was on the 3rd floor, down a corridor that smelled of dust and old cardboard. Emma's hands trembled as she unlocked the padlock. Inside, boxes were stacked neatly. David's clothes, his college textbooks, framed photos she couldn't bear to display. And there, on top of a box marked personal, was the book, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Sonnets from the Portuguese. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed. Emma picked it up, her throat tight with emotion. He gave this to me on our last anniversary, she whispered. Said it was for the woman who saved him. I thought he meant emotionally, but maybe. Vincent stood close, watchful. May I? Emma handed him the book. He examined it carefully, running his fingers along the spine. There, a slight irregularity. He pressed gently, and a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a small USB drive. He hid it in plain sight, Vincent said. Knowing you'd keep it safe without even realizing what you were protecting. Emma felt tears burning. 3 years. I had the answer the whole time and didn't know it. Suddenly Vincent stiffened. We need to leave, now. What? The explosion of gunfire cut off her question. Vincent grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a stack of boxes as bullets tore through the metal door. Someone had followed them. Someone who wanted that drive badly enough to attack in broad daylight. Vincent returned fire with a weapon Emma hadn't seen him carrying, his movements precise and controlled. There's a service exit at the end of the hall. When I say run, you run. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Emma. His eyes met hers, intense and serious. I need you safe more than I need backup. Please. She nodded, clutching the USB drive. Vincent provided covering fire, and Emma ran, her heart pounding as bullets ricocheted off metal walls. She burst through the service exit into an alley where Sal was waiting with the SUV. Where's Vincent? Sal demanded. Still inside? Vincent appeared moments later, breathing hard, a dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. He'd been shot. Drive, he ordered Sal, collapsing into the back seat beside Emma. Hospital's not an option. Take us to the safe house. Emma's nursing training kicked in immediately. Let me see the wound. I'm fine. You're bleeding heavily and in shock. Let me see it now. Something in her tone made him comply. Emma examined the wound with steady hands, her fear transforming into clinical focus. Bullet went through. You're lucky. It missed the major arteries. But you need stitches and antibiotics. The safe house has medical supplies, Sal said from the front. Emma nodded, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. We'll make it work. Vincent was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You're good at this. I was almost a nurse, remember? Her voice softened. This is who I was supposed to be. Someone who helps people. You are helping. You're helping me. Their eyes held for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Emma looked away first, focusing on keeping pressure on his wound, on the steady rhythm of his breathing, on anything but the way her heart had jumped at his words. The safe house was a brownstone in Brooklyn, nondescript from the outside but equipped with everything needed for emergency medical care. Emma worked quickly, cleaning and stitching Vincent's wound with hands that remembered their training, despite 3 years away from medicine. You should have finished school, Vincent said, watching her work. You're talented. Talent doesn't matter if you can't handle the emotional weight. Emma tied off the last stitch. There. Try not to move it too much for the next few days. Thank you. She cleaned up the supplies, then held up the USB drive. We should see what's on this. what David thought was worth dying for. Vincent's laptop revealed spreadsheets, emails, and financial records documenting a massive money laundering operation involving Morrison and Associates and several powerful crime families, including some of Vincent's rivals. "This is enough to bring down half the organized crime in New York," Vincent said quietly. David was sitting on evidence that could destroy empires. Emma felt sick. "And they killed him for it." "Yes, and they've been watching you, waiting to see if you'd lead them to this." He looked at her seriously. "Emma, what we do with this information will change everything. We can give it to the FBI. You'll be safe, they'll be arrested, justice will be served. But it will also mean you'll be a witness, possibly in danger for years. What's the alternative? I use this. Leverage it against the people who killed David. Force them into a position where leaving you alone is their only option." He paused. "It's not justice, not the legal kind, but it's effective." Emma looked at the screen, at David's careful documentation, at the proof of his final act of courage. She thought about 3 years of grief, of rebuilding, of learning to live with unanswered questions. "I want both," she said finally. "I want them arrested. I want justice. But I also want to live without fear. Can you make that happen?" Vincent smiled, and it was genuine. "Yes, I can make that happen." Outside, rain began to fall on Brooklyn, washing the streets clean. Inside, Emma Reynolds and Vincent Moretti sat side by side, planning how to honor a dead man's legacy and build something new from the wreckage of the past. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was a beginning. 6 months later, Emma walked through the doors of Brooklyn Community Hospital in navy blue scrubs, her nursing student ID clipped to her collar. The FBI's case against Morrison and Associates had resulted in 17 arrests. David's evidence had finally brought justice. Vincent had kept his promise. The people who killed David were in prison. The threats had ended. Emma was free. She'd returned to nursing school, funded by a scholarship from an anonymous donor. She knew who it was. Her phone buzzed. A text. "Dinner tonight?" Emma smiled. Vincent had legitimized parts of his business, stepped back from the dangerous edges of his world. They'd maintained careful distance, but something remained unfinished between them. She typed back, "Where?" "Lucerno. Private room. I promise not to order poisoned wine." Emma laughed, drawing looks from passing nurses. After everything, the fear, the violence, the revelations, somehow humor had survived. That evening, she met Vincent at the restaurant where their story began. He stood when she entered, and the careful distance between them felt charged with possibility. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. Emma touched her glass to his. "To second chances." Outside, New York continued its endless rhythm. Inside, 2 people who'd saved each other found the courage to try something neither had expected. Love.